The gods' wood at Winterfell was white and red and whispering. Snow lay in the crooks of the ancient boughs where a child's small hands might once have hidden, and now only the wind would search. Fallen leaves from the weirwood clung to the surface of the hot springs that ran in gray ribbons through the trees, as if the heart tree bled into the steaming pools, and the pools carried that memory in a slow, unending procession to the stones of the great keep. The face carved in the weirwood was older than any name that men in the north could swear on, older even than the stories Theon Greyjoy had been taught to scoff at on his rock-bound isles, and yet that face had watched him since he first came here as a boy. It had watched him swagger and sneer, and it had watched him on those nights when he could not keep from dreaming of waves and the roar beneath cliffs. It watched him now while dawn came thin and pale across the dark. He stood before it with his gloved hands open, empty. The cold bit like a small, cruel hound into the strip of skin between cuff and sleeve. He did not pull the glove higher. Hiding from the gods felt wrong here. That was one of the lessons he'd learned, not from any maester's book, but from the turn of eyes when he lied too easily, when he boasted too loudly, when he did not ride fast enough to catch a boy's laughter. Winterfell taught with a quiet that did not forget. "What is dead may never die," he whispered, the words rising like breath in the cold. And then, softly, lest he tempt someone else God to anger, but rises again, harder and stronger. The heart tree said nothing. Frost rhymed the carved brows and lashes. Its mouth looked closed on all the secrets he did and did not know. The decision, when it came to him, felt like drawing a blade he had been clutching so long, his fingers had forgotten the shape of it. Robb had asked the night before. No, had not asked, not really. Robb had set down the cup and said, "I need you to go to Pike. If your father hears it from you that I would have him as friend, perhaps he will come to our banners. I will not fight the Lannisters with my back turned to the sea." None. It was a king's need and a brother's hope, and to that Theon had answered with a flourish and a grin that did not reach behind his teeth. "He will listen to me," Theon had promised. The words tasted like brine and the echo of his father's contempt. Now in the God's Wood, he measured that boast against the memory of Balon Greyjoy's hand the day he left the Isles. The hand had been hard and spare, a piece of the Iron Islands coastline chiseled into knuckles. It had clasped him like a dead thing. He could picture his father's mouth as easily as the cliffs, the small, satisfied curl when he said, "Theon, Greyjoy by the bone, if not by the leash they keep you on." He looked up into the red eyes. He remembered Lord Stark's too. Nin's gaze not slashed into wood, but steady, open, with a quiet disapproval that made a boy feel smaller than he knew he was. That memory struck more true. It had been a hard thing to grow under that gaze, but it had made the slant of light at Winterfell feel like something you could grow toward, not out of. "I won't go," Theon said to the tree, to the old gods, to the hot breath the earth let out even in frost. "And if that's a coward's refusal, then I'll do a brave man's work here to make up for it." He had scarcely said it before he felt the old pull inside him, the part that wanted to refuse any rule not his own, give way to something steadier. He was surprised to feel relief in the place where shame had been crowding all night. By midday, a pale sun scoured a weak gleam off the inner ward. Theon found Robb in the yard with Grey Wind, both of them already dusted with rime. Bran watched from the saddle Tyrion Lannister had made possible, his face tight with concentration, his mouth drawn with a boy's stubborn refusal to admit he was cold. Sir Roderick Castle, whiskers stiff as knife bristles, was berating a boy at arms about the way the boy held his shield. Robb saw Theon and grinned. The king in the north wore no crown here, only a cloak pinned with the direwolf. But the men in the yard straightened without thinking. "You are late to your practice, Squid," Robb said, good humor in his voice. "I went to the God's Wood," Theon said. Grey Wind's yellow eyes cut to him, nose lifted, and then the direwolf settled again at Robb's side. "Praying you don't have to get seasick on the way to Pike?" Robb teased. Theon drew a breath, held it. He had thought of saying this in a chamber, with only Luwin present. He had thought of saying nothing until he was gone. of leaving a letter. But the North had a way of making secrets look like betrayals before they were even born. "I won't go." The yard stilled in a way that reminded Theon of a frozen river, the sense that water beneath still moved. "Want me?" Sir Roderick repeated, like the word itself offended his whiskers. Robb's mouth, so often quick to smile, went slow and hard. "You spoke last night of how Balon trusts you." "He never trusted me," Theon said simply. "He would hear your offer and spit it back into my hands, and if I bring your words, I bring him a map of your need. I'll not put that in his grip." He kept his voice low, because pride liked to rise when he felt the stare of others. "I'm not going to carry you news to a man who will turn it to an axe and come back around behind you." Robb's hand went to Grey Wind's neck. The direwolf leaned into the pressure. "You think your father plans to strike the North," he said, rather than asked, because he was a Stark and not given to liking suspicions as if they were banners to wave. "I think he does not need a plan to choose treachery," Theon said. "If he means to declare himself a king for the Salt, he cannot have the North hold behind your banners. He will come. He will come. He will come because it is in him to strike where the land runs out and men feel safe." Sir Roderick's mustaches seemed to rearrange themselves into a more thoughtful shape. "There have been more raiding longships on the stony shore," he said slowly. "My sister's husband at Torrens Square sent word of men seen beyond the sandbars where there are never men." Maester Lewin had come up quiet as snowfall, as he often did. "Letters from Deepwood Motte speak of watchers in the trees who do not fell any of them," he said, a little sorrow muffling the metal of his chain. Bran turned his head toward the sound of the maester's voice. Theon's eyes went to the boy without meaning to. Bran's gaze had grown older since his fall. The clear envy Hyde once had of every horse and sword now tempered into something else. "If the turn of the seasons brings crows," Bran said, "you do not tell the crows where the corn is stored." It would have been easy, Theon knew, to hear that and feel only the insult in it, to remember every jest and jibe, squid question of the kraken in a pool of wolves, the way men smiled and then rearranged their faces when he entered. But he found himself glad to take words so plainly given as counsel. "I'll stand with Winterfell," he said, "not to be noble, but because the truth asked for plain speech. Send another south to Pike if you must, but if the Isles come, they'll find my sword here, not the road to their father." Robb's face changed again, as if he had set aside a helm and picked up another. Frustration still marked the line of his jaw, but it was not turned at Theon alone. "I can't send a raven to the sea and expect an answer from the waves. The truth is, there is no one he would hear who would be any less dangerous to us." "Very well." The words were of a king, and they felt like them in the air. "You will not go. You will keep Winterfell with Sir Roderick. We will call in men from the Hornwood and from House Serwyn. Their levies will be quicker than the Risewells. If the raiders come, we'll blow them back into their salt pans. And Theon?" Grey Wind lifted his head again. Theon met the eyes of the wolf before the man's. "Thank you," Robb said, and his hand squeezed once at Theon's shoulder, hard, warmed through leather and fur and pride. The first longship was a coal smudge far off the stony shore that a shepherd boy thought a cloud until the oars caught sunlight like teeth. Then there were more, dark lines in a low sky, and soon after, smoke. Winter fell softly from the heavens while summer burned from the roofs. Sir Roderick moved like he had 30 years ago. His men said he barked orders that turned hearthboys into outriders, sent signals up from the broken tower that had not been lit since Robert's rebellion, and tightened Winterfell like a fist around the people of the Winter Town. Theon rode with him, a kraken on a gray horse among direwolves, and discovered there were things ironborn skill was good for when it was bent to a different master. He could smell the sea in a wind the Northmen called a dry breeze. He could find a longship by the shape of the gulls. He could guess the stretch of water ironborn would choose for the draw of their oars. They found the first raiders 3 miles south of Torrens Square, laughing and drunk on pillage, fire painting their helmets. Theon's arrow took the closest as he turned to call something crude about the mainlanders. The man spun and fell as if the land had bit him. Then it was steel, and the clang against iron was not a strange song in Theon's blood, only one he had never bothered to listen to properly. He met a man from Harlaw who had a tattoo of a kraken on his arm, and the man's eyes were full of recognition and bewilderment both. "Theon," he began, and Theon cut the word in half and sent its ends to different graves. He felt no triumph. He had not expected to feel only grief. The grief was there, small but clean, like a scar you can rub with your thumb and know. They drove the raiders back into the trees that the men of Deepwood swore would rise up and eat you if you were not careful. And Theon found that the woods here did not welcome iron footsteps at all. He had learned to walk Winterfell's courtyards. Now he learned to ride the Wolfswood with a thought toward how branches could hide a bow, how rocks along a stream could break an ankle you needed for climbing a palisade. When they came to Torrens Square, they found the Glover men holding the walls, but scarcely. Robb's army had taken many good men to the south. Theon climbed the parapets, shouted to men who once would not have listened to him, and watched the ironborn shift in the tree line, testing. A banner he knew, black and yellow abatli, flickered between trunks. A black curl of smoke told where a farmhouse had given up its potatoes and its bed slats. Theon sent Sir Roderick's fastest boy with a message to Winterfell. Close the outer gates, call the town inside. Flood the postern path with water from the springs if you can. He thought of old stories about ice, about how it made slow, patient sieges of the strongest walls. The first night, a ragged figure came to the gate and presented himself. "Name yourself," a Glover sentry called down. "Reek," the man called up, and Theon, hearing it, forgot to breathe for a heartbeat. He had never met that creature, but he knew the name as one knows the shadow of a knife that shows on a man's sleeve long before you see the blade. A thing that stank, that followed Ramsay Snow like a crooked echo. None of the Ironborn used names like that. They picked hard names, sea names, and bragged like gulls. Reek was a name a man let be hung on him by another. Reek was a leash you wrapped around your own throat because another's fingers were too strong. "Sir Roderick," Theon snapped, and the old knight was at the parapet in a breath. "No?" Theon said, his voice the low cut of a drawn bow. "Do not let him in. Bring him round to the field below the east wall. Bring him in a noose, if you bring him." "Harsh counsel," Sir Roderick said quietly, not unapprovingly. "Necessary counsel," Theon returned. "If it is who I think it is, he is a wolfskin draped over an old stink. And if it is not, well, we will not find any worse out of this choice." They brought the man to the east wall. He shivered theatrically, and his eyes shifted like minnows in shallow water. Up close, he did not look bent by another's choice, as Theon had imagined. He looked like the thing that bent, himself. His hands were raw, but strong. Theon came down to the yard with men at his shoulders, and a coil of disgust inside that felt much older than him. "Reek," he said coolly, "where is your master?" The man gave him a cowering act that was good enough to fool old women and tired gatekeepers and men who wanted to pity something they could leash. "Dead, lord," he whined. "Oh, dead and gone, and now I'm for your mercy. I've no man now, only what any dog would have." Theon let him talk until the lies cinched tight around themselves. "Strip him," he said. The men did not hesitate. Sir Roderick raised an eyebrow but made no protest. They peeled the filth away, and there on the man's upper arms, between the grime and the scratches, on the pale meat was a clean band where a man with a taste for flaying might keep his own skin unmarked to savor the work. His hair had been greased, but the skull beneath was strong, proud. The nose had a distinctive, cruel cut to it that matched nothing Theon had seen in the Reek stories. But most of all, Theon looked at the eyes and saw in them calculation, unalarmed at having been stripped naked, watchful for weakness. "Ramsay Snow," Theon said, letting the name fall like a stone. For a heartbeat, the man's face went mild and empty, as true simpletons, and Theon almost laughed because he had never seen anyone counterfeit stupidity and then forget it so readily when surprised. "The Boltons send you as a gift?" he asked pleasantly. "What gift?" The voice wanted to whine as Reeks would. and it nearly pitched down, but the shape of the words refused to go limp. "You came to open the gate when we rode to break the noose at Torrens Square," Theon said. "You came to be let in and fetch the wolves for the butcher. It's a neat trick you enacted once already on other gulls, I hear." "No, ye." Sir Roderick came to stand beside him, heavy and very still. "There are teeth in this one," he murmured, the whiskers bristling as if they were alive themselves. "We will pull them." Theon inclined his head. "Bind him and keep him warm. Let him hurt. Hurting men will talk to stop the hurt, but do not freeze him. Cold makes men lose their tongues usefully or not." They put Ramsay in a cell so deep even the hot spring's breath could not reach it, and they lit no fire. The only warmth that touched him came from the bodies of men who came to question him and brought their own heat with them. He did not break easily. Theon knew something of that kind of man. He had seen it in the ironborn captains, men whose idea of prayer was a clenched jaw and a dare offered to any storm. He found himself grimly respectful of the hardness, despising, too, the direction it was pointed. "Lady Hornwood," Theon said on the third day, when they had fed Ramsay just enough that his belly remembered it could ache. "How do you like the taste of meat stolen from starved mouths?" Ramsay's eyes did not flicker. Theon went on anyway. "She's not dead here. She is not a piece of bread in your pocket. She is in Winterfell alive, and you will not touch her again." The lie had been his hardest to swallow, because it had not been wholly a lie. When word came that Lady Donella had been forced to a sham marriage and locked away at the Dreadfort, Sir Roderick had sworn so violently that a boy-at-arms fell over. But Theon had thought of the Bolton's way of making knots in the law like knots in a skin and of how to cut them. He had ridden with a handful of picked men and the quickest horse he could find. They went at night, black as a drowned man's pocket, and they found the Bolton riders with her on the Barrow Road. Maybe the old gods had watched the road and thrown a snarl into a stirrup. Maybe men who lived near the Barrows watched such roads closer. Theon's arrow had flicked one of the men from his saddle, and his sword had taken another down out of the saddle he tried to mount in haste. Lady Hornwood had not looked like a woman rescued by a hero of the songs. She had looked like winter itself, gray, withered, eyes that had seen too many things at once. But she'd sat her horse and come at his side without falling, and in Winterfell, the blacksmith's wife fed her hot broth as if it might be turned back to blood. Theon had set 3 men to her door, and then he had gone to the cells to look at the butcher's son. Ramsay smiled at the words as if they were a tale about a woman in a far country. He smiled at everything and waited. But he talked, finally. When the quiet turned to days and the flesh over his cheekbones hollows deepened like wells. Names came from his mouth like teeth being pulled. Men he had bribed. Places he had burned and credited to ironborn to stir a northern wrath in a wrong direction. That last made Theon go still as the cold outside. Sir Roderick said nothing. He did not need to. There was a weight in the room that was answer enough. Theon wrote to Robb that night under the silence of snow, the lamp sucking its own tears down the wick. He wrote, "There is rot closer than pike. Watch Lord Bolton even as you sup with him." He hesitated and then set down that they held Ramsay in the dark. Names were a kind of blade, too. He signed with a steady hand and sealed with the direwolf stamp Lewin gave him, because some messages were not meant to bear krakens. Days layered into weeks. Asha came to Deepwood mocked like a wind you could not cage, and Meg Mormont sent back a message pinned in the flesh of an ironborn raider that said, simply, "Try harder." Robb marched, lost Karstark men, married his healer. Winterfell braced itself like a man expecting a blow. Theon rode the Wall Road. He oversaw the closing of the outer gates and watched families come sobbing in with their chickens and their bears and their bundles of blankets. He had thought that if battle came, it would taste like salt and iron. He only learned now it tasted like smoke and children held very tight by women who had to put down their knives to do it. The ravens from the south on the last day of the harvest moon were fat and dark and heavy with grief. They arrived one after the other, pecking at the windows until the ravens already in the rookery cawed back so loudly that men in the yard lifted their heads and felt their hearts give an odd stutter. It was Lewin who took the messages in hand, one and then another. The second he did not read aloud. He sat and held it for the space of 2 slow breaths, as if the parchment weighed more than his chain. Then he stood. "All to the hall," he said, and no one thought to argue. There were no candles lit for feasting in the great hall. The air itself seemed to have grown dimmer, as if the stone had drunk the light. Men crowded under the old beams. The direwolf banners on the walls hung heavy with damp. Bran came in seated, Hodor behind him with a step that tried to be careful and was only big. Rickon tried to run and was caught by Osha's hand before his little legs could tangle him. Sir Roderick stood at Luwin's side, and Theon, who had never had to tell his face not to smile like a fool after a hunt well done, had to tell it now not to go raw and sloppy with dread before he knew the worst. Luwin raised one message. "The king in the north is dead," he said. "Silence is not one thing. Sometimes it is a curtain falling. Sometimes it is a blade." This was a hole in the world. The men did not shout or grab one another. They did not toss benches or beat the walls. They stood and let sound drain out of the hall, and if any of them shut their eyes, they did it like men who had seen blood enough to know what closing your eyes cost. "Walder Frey," Luwin said, a rasp in his throat, with Bolton's men at his side. Rickon's cries uncorked and ugly, furious, childish. The sound a cub makes when you take away something it has never considered it could lose. Bran took them into himself the way the heart tree took snow. He lifted his chin. "The North remembers," he said, and the words were too large for a boy's mouth and fit him all the same. Theon did not feel anything for a long moment, as if the names had come in a tongue he did not know. Then the meaning smacked him like a board, and he tasted blood. He thought of Robb's hand on his shoulder in the yard. He thought, stupidly, of gray wind, the color of fog, and what a quiet beast he had been when Robb scratched under his jaw. Then he thought, very clearly, of the letters he had sent and the names that Ramsay had spat out like gristle. There was a letter among the Raven's burden. It bore a ribbon in Frey colors and Roose Bolton's neat, clean hand. "By rightful decree of King Tommen, Lord Roose Bolton is named Warden of the North. All keepers of keeps, all lordlings and masterless men, take heed. Winterfell is to be yielded unto the king's man. You will receive the king's peace if you obey, and the king's knife if you do not." Sir Roderick made one low noise under his breath that made the hair on Theon's neck rise. "If he is Warden of the North," Sir Roderick said, "then I'm a maiden in a lace coif. I have his bastard in irons," Theon said very quietly, and heard the men nearest him go still because the quiet was more dangerous than a shout. "He came to us with tricks in his sleeves and foxes in his smile. I took the sleeves off. I took the smile away. He named his father's friends and their pretty little treacheries. I sent warning. He did not add. It seems I sent it to the place where warning goes to die." Luwin's hand settled on his arm, barely there. "You will not take the blame for a man like Roose Bolton," he murmured. "In such men, treachery is like a seed that springs whenever a bit of dirt and a bit of water meet. It was always there." The hall swelled with a murmuring talk that was not panic and not calm. Names rose and fell. Manderley, Serwyn, Risewell, Dustin, tall men and large women with old grudges and new wounds. Theon felt men's eyes on him, measuring the kraken and the wolf stitched together as if by a novice's first attempt at embroidery. He had learned to recognize that looking. He understood now that the eyes seldom matched in what they wanted to see. He went to the cell at dawn, before the hall had finished drinking and begun sleeping. Ramsay lifted his head, less out of strength than out of a desire to make men waste their words on him. "Have they given me the honor due to me yet?" he asked pleasantly. "The bedding without the bedding. The bravos with knives wrapped up in their tongues? No, Bolton is warden of nothing but his own grave plot," Theon said. He had not made the words up before. They were there waiting in him like a song he had half heard on one of the isles and forgotten. "I will make that true with my own hands if need be. And you?" Ramsay's smile was a split and a rotting thing. "Me?" Theon stepped closer to the bars. "If you have a prayer left, bastard, say it to gods who do not listen," he said. "If they answer, they are not the kind I would trouble with mine." Wyman Manderley arrived at Winterfell as the next snows fell. Not in stealth. Wyman did nothing in stealth, but with banners and carts, horses and barrels, and a dozen singers who knew all the old songs and some newer ones that made the kitchen girls squeal. He was big enough now that the men of White Harbor joked his chair had to learn to hold him up the way an oarsman learned to stand in a rolling boat. He came into the hall and bowed so deeply that Sir Roderick had to take a step backward to avoid being smothered by the sweep of his cloak. "My lords, my ladies," Wyman boomed. And then for Bran, he had the sense to make that small nod to the boy, "My lord." His eyes flicked to Theon and away, and then back again with open curiosity. "We have come to break bread. Should there be bread to break, and drink ale? Should the barrels be left unstaved by this king's knives, and see what is to be seen? The North looks hungry. I hope you will find that White Harbor knows how to bring food with its swords." None. There were pies. There were men. There were whispers under the laughter like little knives in a cloth bag. Wyman sent envoys quietly out with small tokens that did not look like tokens to those who did not know. He spoke loudly of how his ships were at anchor in the cold, and how any man with an eye for sails knew that a fleet did not like to be kept without work. "We could scrape eels until the womenfolk forget their husbands' faces," he said cheerfully. "But I confess I'd rather have my oars smell of victory than fish." "Your oars," Theon said. Wyman tilted his head and smiled. "Aye, White Harbor's oars. But being no fisherman, I have not forgotten the difference between a river and the narrow sea. I understand oars in either, Lord Greyjoy." Theon took it and did not flinch. "The ironborn hold deep wood mud and trouble the stony shore," he said. "They will try for Moat Cailin if they have not already. That is the choke in our throat. Are you minded for a ride through the bogs?" "No, nay, you must have da. Not with this belly," Wyman said with a laugh, patting himself. "But I can lend men who do not have one, and ships too. Ships to carry you to the stony shore, and perhaps a few ships to carry you back if the shore proves too stony. The Manderleys have been Greenlanders for many a generation, but we have not forgotten the color of salt. We will need the reeds," Sir Roderick said. "Moat Cailin is not a place you take so much as a place you learn to live with until it gives up out of boredom or fever. If Howland Reed will lend us his strangest tricks, we might keep our men." "None. Ah, he will," Bran said softly, surprising them. When the heads turned, they found not a boy showing off, but a boy who had dreamt something beyond what any of them had dreamed. "He will send men with frog spears and ways of moving on water where there is no water. He will tell us which stones to step on and which you sink under." No one laughed at that. Theon felt the hair on his arms stir. It was Davos Seaworth who brought the king. Not to men, not the crowning from the south, not a boy with a mother who wore her love like a knife. Stannis Baratheon came with a lean army that looked like iron bent into shapes that walked and spoke. He came in from the East Road, the frost on his beard making him look older than he was, and the scowl making him look exactly himself. Theon stood in the yard, with Bran at his shoulder and Sir Roderick at the other, and watched the black stags stiffen on banners, as if the cold itself had turned them to stone. Davos' eyes flicked over Theon with a wary familiarity. The smell of the sea hung around the man like a prayer. "Winterfell," Stannis said, not greeting it so much as naming it to see if it would flinch. "Your wolf banners are still up. Good. I am told Bolton writes a new name on the walls." He looked at Bran as if he could not quite credit that a boy in a saddle could be the heart of a place, then accepted it when the place did not change shape under his gaze. "We will take them down. You are welcome under these roofs, your grace," Sir Roderick said, and the words had grit in them. The old knight had not bent his neck for many men in his life. "We have need of a king's justice. If I have any left after feeding it to my brother's killers, you shall have it," Stannis said. The anger in him was old and bloodless and real. Theon watched him and thought, This is a man who would cut off his own fingers to avoid owing another's hand a debt. He looked at the stump on Davos. He looked at the boy who sat still and did not say he was tired. They held a council in the solar where the windows opened on cold and the steam from the pools curled drunkenly through the glass. Stannis spread the north like a game board and waited as if it could be forced to see reason by frowning at it hard enough. "We will strike Moat Cailin first," he said. "Every northern holdfast depends on what can crawl through that neck. You will have the reeds. We will take Deepwood Motte as we move," Theon said. "Asha." He stopped. He was not sure what to call her in this room. "Your sister," Davos said quietly. Not a priest's correction, but almost as blunt. "My sister," Theon acknowledged. "She is no fool. She holds Deepwood Motte because it hurts, not because she loves it. She will not die on a Northman's pike for a holdfast she does not mean to keep in the spring. If we offer her safe passage to the shore, she will likely take it. If we press her..." Stannis gave him a long look, and what was in it was not disdain. "You are the son of a rebel," he said, as he would have said you are 5 feet, and some, and no more. "You would bend your salt to my law." It was not a taunt. It was a measurement being made. "I would bend myself to keep this place standing," Theon said, and heard in his own voice something he had not heard there before. "Stone can be cut with water, but slowly. I have no slowly to spare." The upshot of that hard talk and the colder ones that followed was this: Stannis would strike Bolton where Bolton felt strongest, but he did not know the bog the way the reeds did, and he did not know the sea the way the ironborn did. The Manderley ships would carry Theon and 200 picked men along the coast as far as the river mouths would allow, landing at the stony shore to harry the raiders from behind and push them toward the neck like fish into a weir. Meanwhile, light-footed crannogmen would ply their tricks in the swamps, making a slow death for whichever ironborn decided Moat Cailin was worth fevers and arrows that sang out of fog. Sir Roderick would hold Winterfell with every old man and boy he could count to 5. Wyman would feed them pies and make jokes about which phrase tasted best roasted and which boiled, while counting how many casks of pitch he had for the walls. On the night before the sails were to be unfurled, Theon walked the Godswood again. The snow muffled the stones. The heart tree's red mouth seemed deeper, the sap in it caught in a snarl. He did not ask it anything. He had begun to learn that the asking made a man sound like a boy begging a rough sea to be gentle. He said instead, "Watch them." A voice spoke from the shadows between 2 trunks, and he did not startle. "The ghosts here wore boots and old cloaks. The old gods hear their own," said Mira Reed. She stepped into the pale light and smiled at him, an odd, friendly, dangerous creature. Her brother came behind her like fog coming at ankle height. "They will watch what they watch. Tell your father." "He knows," Jojen said. His eyes were silty and too deep. "He told us to tell you that green dreams are not always kind, and that you should spare who will be useful and not who will beg prettily." His gaze slid past Theon's shoulder, into a place that wasn't there, and Mira's mouth thinned with an affection that did not exclude exasperation. "I have a sister to spare," Theon said, surprising himself with how easy the admission was. "And a bastard to kill." Mira nodded, businesslike, and then softer. "The boy with the little wolf will go away." Theon swallowed. "Bran? He will go to a place that is not on your maps, but is in your stories," Jojen said, not unkindly. "He will return where he belongs, but not as he was." Theon found himself nodding. He had heard stranger in the drowned god's house. He had learned to take offerings of meaning where they were set before him, and this too was an offering, though he did not know which god's altar it had been laid on. They came out of White Harbor in a gray line, the Manderley ships broad in the belly and the iron in them well hidden. Theon stood at the prow with the spray cutting his face, and for the first time since he had spat in his father's image and chosen the wolf, he felt something in him lift like a sail. The sea did not care. The sea did not stop being the thing he had loved and feared because he had set his name in the north. He decided privately he would let it take that part of him it demanded and not apologize to any tree for it. They harried the stony shore as promised. The ironborn did not expect a kraken to leap out of a wolf's mouth. The first band they hit fled inland and stumbled into reeds who looked like bushes until they changed shape. The second made a stand in a line of dunes and left a line of corpses. The third had Asha with them. She came through driving sleet like a blade that did not look as if it could have rust. With 20 good men at her back and a habit of looking everywhere at once that had saved her life a dozen times on pike, Theon found her between two snow-worn rocks and raised a hand, stopping his men with the plainness of that gesture. She tilted her head, and he saw a dozen memories cross her face like gulls crossing a sky quickly and messily. "Brother," she said. She did not call him little. She did not sneer. She had the dignity of a woman who had decided not to spend herself on contempt, and it fit her like armor. "Asha," he said. The snow sizzled on the edge of his sword and ran in white lines down the steel. "I came to offer you a way back to the ships with your men still breathing. Deepwood Motte isn't worth your bones. Everything's worth my bones if I choose to lay them down," she said. And there was pride in it, yes, but also the rough good humor of the Isles. "You look more like a mainlander every time I see you. Don't put a cow under you and call it a horse yet, Theon. But I have no wish to make a song called The Day Asha Proved Stupidity." She frowned at the line of manderly sails with a professional appreciation. "Those fat masts will break in a real wind," she observed. "But not today." "Turn and go," Theon said. "Tell our uncle he should keep his madness in his skull and let his crows pick it out there instead of letting them pick it from the stones of the neck. Tell him the north is not the shore. Tell him it is teeth that close slowly and never open." She lifted a shoulder. "I would tell him the sea is salt and the sky is gray, and he would call it treason if he had decided to taste blue," she said. "But I will go, and when I see father, I will tell him you put your sword between the Isles and the wolves. He will like that. It will mean he can hate you more purely." She turned. One of her men looked at Theon and spat. Asha broke the man's wrist without looking directly at him. "Spit on the deck, not on blood," she said. And it could have been an old saying or something she had made up on the spot. She did not look back again. Ice feathered her shoulders. When she was a shadow, Theon let out a breath he hadn't noticed holding. Moat Cailin was a disease more than a place. Theon felt it in his teeth. The three towers squatted like toads in a bog that old men in Winterfell had said was bottomless, even as they drew water from it with clay pitchers. The ironborn had crept in and made themselves small in its crevices, and they were turning sicker day by day. The reeds brought fevers like gifts in baskets. They brought arrows that made men cough to death. They did it neatly, as if they were weaving a mat and had all winter. Theon watched and learned. He took 2 skirmishes into the black water, his men walking where the reeds looked the same to any eye but a Crannog man's, and did not swallow them. He thought, with a sudden strange shock of pride, Ned Stark would not hate me, seeing this. The end was not a trumpet but a soft uncoiling. The Ironborn sent out a man to parley, and the man had the gray-green of fever under his skin. Theon took him where he could vomit into the bog without the wind carrying it back onto his boots. "A ship," the man said, and his voice tore. "Half my men. Let us go, and the rest will lay down arms." "Stannis will flay you for treason," Theon said, not relishing it and not lying. "We swore to Balin, not to him," the man said, and the bleakness in that was not far from something Theon understood. "I swore to my captain, not to that bastard in the tower and not to his sickness." "Your captain is dead," Theon said evenly, "and the bastard in the tower belongs to me." He was not ready for Ramsay's attempt on his life the night they opened the gates. He should have been. Men like Ramsay did not sit quietly when their fate was being written by others. But even so, the speed of it, the ferret smell of it, the cornered animal courage, caught him for a heartbeat off guard. Ramsay came out of the dark like a knife that had learned to walk, and Theon's men went down under him clumsily because they were used to men who fought honest or stupid. Theon took the second cut himself, steel along the ribs, hot and wet, reaching his skin through fur. He smelled his own blood and had a quick, dizzying memory of salt water up the nose. Then he moved the way the sea taught boys on pike to move, low, sudden, with a willingness to take a bruise to get the hold he wanted. He put Ramsay on his back and broke his forearm with a twist that made the bones sound like a green branch snapping. Ramsay screamed and then, astonishingly, laughed. "This part," he said, eyes bright with delight and hate in equal measure. "This part is good." Theon had thought ahead enough to keep a length of chain near. He wrapped it twice around Ramsay's throat and pulled slowly, while Ramsay tried to hook his fingers into Theon's lips and make his face into a grin. "This part is mine," Theon said when Ramsay made a wet sound like a thing under a boot, and he pulled until there were no more sounds and then pulled a little longer. They took Deepwood Motte. Asha, true to her word, was gone, leaving behind a mocking token, a kraken charm pinning a scrap of wolf pelt, as if to say, if you must be both, at least practice your stitchery. Maid Mormont clapped Theon on the shoulder hard enough to bruise, and said that if he kept this up, she would name one of her daughters Kraken, and he would have to live with it. The Manderley carts brought food, and Wyman flirted with every woman over 25 and under 60, malevolently merry, when word came that a certain trio of Freys had gone missing on the side roads to White Harbor. Stannis watched all of it and did not laugh once. The man was iron with a spine inside it. When the snows came harder and he could no longer pretend that the world was anything but white and hungry, he came to the Godswood with Sir Davos and a parchment. Theon was there because he found himself more and more in that place where his blood wanted to argue with itself. Bran was there because he went where the old gods went, which was everywhere. Winterfell needs a warden, Stannis said. He was not a man given to ornamenting his speech. Wardens are my gift. In another season, with a different table, I would prefer to put that gift in a house that has held it for 1,000 years, and will hold it for 1,000 more. A Stark, Theon said. He did not hide the ache in the name. He had never understood, when he was a boy, why the Isles held no tree worth carving. Only a god who took his sacrifices gladly, and gave the small, hard courtesy of letting you build your own strength. The weirwood gave something else, and Theon had once thought it poison. Now he craved it like meat after a voyage. A Stark, Stannis agreed. But the Starks are not to hand in that shape, and my war needs this place held by someone with sense who is not bought by Lannister coin or Bolton cruelty. The North needs a hand on its throat that will not squeeze too hard and will not look to the South for approval of every gesture. He looked at Theon with something almost kinder than his usual look. My hand says you have learned to be more than a braggart's son. The Reeds say you listen. Manderley says you eat when there is food and go hungry when there is not without complaining loudly. Sir Roderick says you are stubborn enough to pull a harum-scarum boy out of a fire and a wise enough fool to stay and feel the heat on your own face. These are recommendations I do not often hear in one man. I will set you Warden of the North, Theon Greyjoy. Nona, God. The parchment cracked softly in the cold as Stannis opened it. Davos' mouth was set in its usual unlovely line, but his eyes were almost warm. Bran watched, and Theon felt a tide shift inside him that had nothing to do with ships. I will hold it until a Stark sits here and wants it back, Theon said. His voice did not hitch. If that Stark kills me to take it, I will not say that wasn't fair. He looked at Bran, at his small, thin hands folded on his blanket. I will hold it as if I am only ever holding it for someone else. That is the best that can be asked of any man who takes something old in his hands and claims it, Stannis said. He offered the parchment the way a man might offer a sword to see if another knew how to take it. Theon did, and he kept his fingers from shaking with a care that felt not like pride but like reverence. The ceremony was not a ceremony. There were no trumpets. Men in the hall raised their cups carefully, as if toasting too loudly would be disrespectful. Wyman hollered, and then coughed and made a joke about having swallowed a pie wrong, and Sir Roderick squeezed Theon's shoulder with a grip that said more than oaths. The lords who hated him most stayed home. The ones who merely disliked him muttered, and then presently went to see whether their men's boots needed mending. Theon did not mind. He had not expected any man to love him for this. He had only expected to be given work, and now he had it. Bran went away when the snows lay like sleeping dogs in the yard, and Theon watched him go from a window that looked like a slit a giant had made with his knife when the castle was new. Hodor walked, and Jojen walked as if he were following a path only he could see, and Mira walked with her spear carried like a promise. Osha walked with them and did not look back. Rickon howled in a way that made men move in the yard because there was a tone in it as of a creature being killed. Theon closed his eyes. He did not go after them. He had sworn to make this place a place to come back to. There was no use in him going after them to do that. He went to the old crypts that night. He had not liked them the first time he came to Winterfell. They had smelled of old bones and men who had been sure of themselves for so long that they had forgotten to say it out loud. Now the smell seemed like comfort, not arrogance. Wolves stalked along stone in the flicker of his torch. The kings of winter did not turn their heads. They had no heads to turn. He stood before the hollow where Ned Stark's stone lay, and for a moment he could not call Lord Stark's face to mind as it had looked in life, only the way the stone had tried to catch it and had almost done it. "I have your house," he said softly. "I will not make it mine. If I am wrong, send me a knife. If I am right, send me a son of yours to give it to." The flame cackled once and then drooped. He did not expect an answer. The North answered like the sea did, not in words, not in kindness, but in whether your work held. The snows grew worse. There were days when the sky was a white wall inches from your face, and you had to walk with your hand on the stone to find your way from one tower to another. There was hunger, though Wyman proved that a fat man can be more generous than two thin men put together, and the kettles bubbled day and night with whatever would make broth. There were quarrels and sorrow and a wedding between two people who looked like they had chosen each other as an act of stubbornness against the cold. Theon mediated disputes about sheep, about why one man had cheated another at tiles, about whether a girl had been insulted or merely observed with insufficient poetry. He signed decrees about grain with the same care he had once taken sharpening a sword. He rode the walls until the cold sliced through his boots and made his toes feel like someone else's. Messengers came and went. From the south, they brought tales that were already going old in the telling. A lion cub with a queen mother, a dwarf accused and standing on his own two small feet against a tower of hate, a girl with hair the color of spring snared in a nest of black wings. From the east, a story came that Theon liked because it had nothing to do with him. A queen across the sea who freed slaves and frowned at dragons the way a sensible woman frowns at the price of apples if the numbers are too high. He listened and nodded. He did not let the stories blow him from the work in front of him. In the spring that arrived not with flowers but with mud and the sound of water trying to remember how to run, the ravens brought back one message that made Theon go still and feel, for an instant, that white loss again. Balon Greyjoy had been blown from a rope bridge into the sea, and the sea had done what it always did with Greyjoys. It had taken him and told no story. Theon held the parchment and stared at the black glistening where the ink had gone too heavy in one stroke of the quill. A king's moot was called on Old Wick. Names rose like gulls and circled each other. Euron came back with ships under him like sharks and a smile that had known how to eat men since before he had teeth for bread. Asha put her back into her claim and found that Salt Brothers did not love a woman's hand on a tiller when it meant they could not imagine their own. Victarion glowered and counted the days he did not behead anyone as a piety. Theon sent nothing. He sent not a word, not a raven. When a boy from the kitchens asked him, shyly, if he would go to be king, Theon laughed in a way that made the boy step back. "I have a colder kingdom," he said. "It is harder to hold and less grateful." Euron sent a ship. It came skirting the line where the bite of the north turned to the bite, its sails black as if they could swallow light, and it sent 3 men rowing across the water in a little boat that bobbed like a toy. The men came to the outer quay and shouted up in a language made of brag and fish. Theon went down to meet them with Wyman at his side and a small army of archers under the parapet, doing their best to look merely bored. The foremost man was tall and wore a crow's feather in his beard. His grin made Theon think of the space between teeth where rot begins without showing. Euron the Crow's Eye, king of salt and rock, Lord Reaper of Pike, and the rest of the words that make him prick, the man called merrily, sends his regards to his nephew, who governs wolves for a stag. He offers alliance, he offers friendship, he offers, what is the word? Amends. He rolled the last word in his mouth as if it were new and not quite to his taste. Theon let him finish and then did not climb down to the little ladder that would have brought him closer. "Tell Euron Greyjoy," he said, keeping his voice flat, "that the North's friendship is sold for meat in its kitchens and its amends are dug under the snow. Tell him that if he brings his ships into the Bight, I will tow them ashore and let them dry there like old bones for the children to climb on. Tell him that when I was a boy, I thought men like him were the sea. I have learned since that they are only the foam on top of it." The man with the crow's feather laughed. "Fair enough," he said. "I'll tell him, but you'll excuse me if I add in a few better turns of phrase. Foam. Bah. He tugged at a rope and let his little boat lurch back into the dark water. Wyman chuckled. "Foam," he said, and his double chin shook. "I like that. The kitchen girls will make a game of it. Euron Foamface." "He will come anyway," Theon said. "Oh, certainly," Wyman agreed, as if they had been discussing whether or not it would snow again before night. "But it will make him angrier when we call him what he is. He'll make more mistakes that way." They made ready. Theon stood on the walls of White Harbor and thought about the way light lies on water when it means to deceive you. Euron came as predicted and with more noise than was necessary. He sailed as if the sound of his arrival were a weapon. He lashed 2 ships together to make platforms for scorpions and thought himself clever. He sent fire as if the North had not been warming its hands over it all winter. Theon put the Manderley fleet where he wanted them, fat and low and deceptively slow. He sent his best riders along the shore with mirrors and signal flags. He used the tide as a rope to trip Euron's front ranks. When Euron sent his scorpions bolts, Theon let them thud into the shields he had made from barrels that had once held pickled fish. "Smells like home," he said dryly to Wyman, and Wyman laughed until he hiccuped and then killed a man who had thought him too slow to lift a sword. It is not the business of battle to last long when one man knows the water better than the other. Even if the other is a crow's eye with his head full of screams he thinks are songs. The sea sucked 2 of Euron's ships into a channel Theon had mapped with stones and hatred, and there a hidden boom, weighted with chains that a dozen oxen had dragged from the smithy, rose and toppled them like a boy swats beetles. The air filled with shouts, with snaps, with the smell of burning pitch and the wet metal stink of blood. Through it all, Theon moved as if pulling an old, worn cloak over his shoulders and finding it still fit. He boarded a ship he swore he had seen once at Lannisport as a boy. He put a sword into a man who had stood with him on the walls of Pike and taught him a filthy version of a song about sailors and goat girls. He saw a flash of a man with a black patch over one eye and thought, "If I find you today, I end something." And the thought pleased him without sweetness. He did not find Euron. The North is not a place that satisfies men like that. It let Euron feel the bite, and then pulled back. The ironborn limped away with fewer ships and more stories to tell, and less joy in telling them. Theon stood on White Harbor's quays while the wet snow fell and tried to decide if the taste in his mouth was victory or only salt. He decided it was work. He decided he liked it. That night he went back to Winterfell for the first time in 3 weeks, and walked into the Great Hall with mud on his boots and a weight in his bones that felt not like weariness but like a good load in a cart. He saw Rickon asleep under a bench with a hound stretched on his feet. He saw Bran's empty chair and felt that ache again that he had learned to let be a part of the room, like the draft by the southern door. He saw Wyman boasting of pies and Sir Roderick lecturing a boy on the proper way to clean chainmail. He saw, over all of it, the wolf banners heavy with damp that was already beginning to lift like grief when it is told it may. Just for a night, be quiet. He went to the God's Wood last. The face in the tree did not look kinder. The snow on its brows was not less. The mouth did not speak. Theon stood there with his gloves in his hands, and his breath going up like offerings. He did not speak either. He had learned that sometimes silence is the right coin to pay. When at last he heard steps behind him, he did not turn quickly. He knew the sound of Lewin's chain. "I cannot say that our lives have become simpler," the maester said mildly. "I am not sure I ever believed they would," Theon said. "The ravens brought a message," Lewin went on. The chain chimed softly when he lifted a hand, as if the links themselves had opinions about the winter. "Not from the south. From a place that is not on the maps. Howland Reed sends it wrapped in moss and written on something that looks like bark but is not." "Nay, what does it say?" Lewin cleared his throat. "It says, the boy walks. He is safer where the roots drink. It says your hand is not light, but it is steady enough. It says, there are worse wardens than men who have loved two gods and disappointed both in ways that made them gentler." Theon felt his mouth twist. "I am a disappointment," he said, and did not make it a jest. "Perhaps," Lewin said, and in that word was the whole of a maester's kindness. The refusal to lie, the refusal to wound. "But the north is held, Lord Warden. We will eat this spring. The walls do not burn. The banners do not hang over our enemies' heads. The boys we have, that is, the boy will have a place to come back to. There are measures by which that is more than not disappointing." Theon looked up at the red eyes and thought of salt. He thought of stone. He thought of the way a good rope is made. Many strands twisted together until they hold a weight none could bear alone. He had been one strand and then another. And now, perhaps he was part of something like a rope. "Tell Stannis," he said, "that if he brings me a Stark out of the snow, I will put a cloak on him and a meal before him and a chair under him, and then I will stand at his back until he says he does not need me there. Tell Manderley I will not let him turn the kitchens into a war. Tell Sir Roderick," he smiled, unexpected. "Tell him to stop talking until the boys fall asleep at his feet." "I will tell them," Lewin said with a small, pleased sound, as if someone had finally written a neat sentence in a messy book. Theon put his hand on the bark of the weirwood. The cold went through him, not like a knife, but like water poured over a head. Shocking, clarifying, something he had known the taste of a long time without naming. He did not pray. He did not think of the drowned god or the old gods or any god at all. He thought of work, and of winter, and of the sudden, sharp, absurd idea that perhaps, after all that had been taken from him, and all that he had been too proud to give, he had been given this. Outside the Godswood, the snows were falling in a softer way, the way they sometimes did when the wind shifted, and the sky admitted it could not rage all the time. Theon walked back through the steam that rose from the baths and across the yard where boys drilled and men laughed and women carried coal in baskets, and when a girl with chapped hands pressed past him with a tray of bowls and nearly spilled it, he took two to steady the load and walked with her as far as the kitchen door. She smiled at him, her teeth small and crowded, and he smiled back. For a moment, his face felt strange, as if it were learning a new art. He let it be. In the morning, he would go to the armory and talk about arrow fletching and the way bowstrings stretch in damp and how often they needed to be replaced when rain got into the fibers. After that, he would hear 3 disputes between men who had been hungry too long and jostled each other too hard. And then he would write to White Harbor asking for more saltfish because the river ice had broken and the nets were light for now. He would read with Rickon until the boy snarled and ran off to chase dogs. He would choose the men to ride the wall road. He would go to the cells and look at the empty hook where a chain had hung. He would stand with Sir Roderick on the walls in a wind that flayed faces smarter than any Bolton and talk about which stone in the gate wanted resetting. For tonight, he went to the hall. He ate. He listened. He felt the weight of the parchment in his sleeve. Not heavy, not light. When he stood at last and the benches scraped and rose with him, he felt the men's eyes on him again. The measuring, the disliking, the grudging. He met them and held them the way he had held the chain. He did not ask anyone to love him. He did not demand it of his heart either. It was enough to be here, to be working, to be the hand on the throat that did not squeeze too hard. When the candles burned low and the night sighed itself out, Theon Greyjoy, Warden of the North, went to sleep with the sound of the hot spring's breath in his ears and the scent of old smoke in his hair, and dreamed, not of drowning, not of falling, but of standing in snow while a boy walked away and the earth under the snow stirred, alive, alive.